Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Parsha webcast. We will be teaching this week the portion of Vayeitsei. And the portion of Vayeitsei is a rather very interesting one. It is the portion that all of our 12 tribes, actually 11 of the 12 tribes are born in the story of this week's portion. The portion begins with Yakov Avinu, with our patriarch Jacob, who had to run away from his brother, from his father and mother's house, because his brother Esav wanted to kill him. If you will remember, the reason why he wanted to kill him was because he connived. He was very conniving and he was very deceitful to his father, and he was able to get the blessings that his father was meant to give Esav. Yakov arranged through a very interesting way that he should get those blessings. And his brother Esav was furious, and because of this he wanted to kill him. And when his mother found out that Esav is looking to kill Yakov, he tells him, run away. Go to my brother Lavan, who lives in a different country, in the place called Haran, and over there stay with him till your brother calms down, and then you'll come back home. So that's what he does. He goes. And our sages tell us that on his way, he stopped off in the yeshiva for 14 years. And when he finished learning in the yeshiva for 14 years, he continued on to his uncle Lavan's house. And when he got there, to make the long story short, just briefly, when he got there, it says that he met Lavan's daughter, that would be his own first cousin, and her name was Rachel, Rachel. And he liked her very much, and he decided that he wants to get married to her. So he asked her father, Lavan, if he can marry her. So Lavan said, yeah, if you work for me for 7 years, then I'll allow you to marry her. Clear? Now, Rachel had an older sister, and this older sister's name was Leah. So Yaakov worked for the 7 years, and now is the time that he's going to get married to Rachel. So his uncle Lavan, Rachel's father, made a whole wedding feast, and he invited the town to made a party. And it happened that when the wedding was over, instead of sending to the house where they were going to stay, instead of sending Rachel, he sent Leah. And because it was dark, and there was no electricity, so there were no lights, and it was pitch dark, so he did not know that it was Leah instead of Rachel. And the plot thickens. What happened was, Yaakov had a suspicion that Lavan would do this to him. He had such a suspicion. So what did he do? He made up with Rachel beforehand that just to make sure that he doesn't get fooled, he made a secret code with Rachel to only she knew, so that when she comes home after the wedding and she'll tell him the secret code, he'll know it's Rachel. But what did she do? When she saw that Lavan, the father, sent the older sister, Leah, to the house to be with her new husband, with Yaakov, Rachel realized that now Leah is going to be very embarrassed because she doesn't know the secret code. And there's going to be a terrible, terrible embarrassment for her sister. So she went ahead and gave the secret code to Leah. So Yaakov comes home, thinking it's Rachel, and they talked about the secret code, and she told him the secret code, so he thought he was certain it was Rachel. And they both consummated the marriage, and he woke up the next morning, and behold, it's not his wife. It's not the wife he thought he was going to have. It's Leah. So he was furious. He went to his brother, his uncle, and said, "How did you do this to me? I worked 7 years for the younger daughter, and you give me the older daughter. You're not a man of your word. This is not right." So Lavan tells him, "I'm sorry, but we, in our place, where we live, we don't marry off the younger one before the older one. It goes in order. Like today, it's the same thing in many circles." So he says, "If you want, I will, if you work for me another 7 years, you can then marry, I'll let you marry Rachel as well." But this time, he was a little better. He said, "I won't make you wait 7 years. Let's wait till this week is over, the week of the celebration of the first wedding, and right away you'll marry Rachel, and then you'll work for me afterwards for 7 years." He agreed. So now he marries Rachel, the two sisters. On top of that, Lavan, this deceitful individual, gave to the two daughters, Leah and Rachel. He told Rachel, he gave to his two daughters, Leah and Rachel, he gave them each a maidservant, which was also like in order that they should help them in the house and be with them. And in fact, they both married Yakov also. They were two sisters. They were two sisters. Their names were Bilhah and Zilpah. That was the name. And he gave them each. They were also two of his daughters, two of Lavan's daughters, from a different wife. And he gave them to Yakov, to Rachel and to Leah to be in their house, to be the maidservant. And they also married Yakov. So to sum the whole story up, Yakov married 4 sisters. He married 4 sisters. Imagine that. So you're all wondering, how could someone marry 4 sisters? It's not even... it's unthinkable.
Same mother-in-law.
Strong guy.
At least he only had one mother-in-law, right?
That's a good thing.
I would think, yeah.
That's what you think.
Actually, he had 2 mothers-in-law. They were 2 sisters from different mothers. They shared one father. He had one father-in-law with 2 mothers-in-law. Anyway, but here's the big question. Here's the million-dollar question. There's a famous known, we know that Yakov and Avram and Yitzchak, these early Jewish fathers, our patriarchs, they all, it says, the sages tell us that they kept all the mitzvot, even before the Torah was given. They lived before the Torah was given to the Jews at Mount Sinai. But we're told, the sages tell us, the Medrash tells us, that they kept all the mitzvot even before the Torah was given. That means they knew it, what the mitzvahs were. They were prophets. And they kept them all. They kept Pesach, and they kept Shavuos, and they kept kosher, and they kept everything. So here comes the big question. We know that there's a prohibition in the Torah to marry 2 sisters. A person is not allowed to marry 2 sisters. You're not even allowed to. Forget about the health issues or whatever, but you're not even allowed to. By Torah law, it is a prohibition to marry 2 sisters. Did you know that?
No.
So how could it be that Yakov married 2 sisters? If you're telling me that he kept all the mitzvot before the Torah was given, he should have known that there was going to be a mitzvah not to marry 2 sisters. So how did he do it? It's a very good question.
There were 2 Jacobs.
No, it was the same Jacob.
Oh, okay.
The same Jacob. By the way, I just want you to know, before we go further, did you know that there's a custom by a Jewish wedding that before the chuppah,
Yes.
the groom goes over to the bride and he pulls over a veil over her face.
Verify to make sure that.
But before, before he pulls it over, he looks at her to make sure this is his wife. Just in case someone else is going to, be such a mistake. Where do we get this custom from? We get the custom from Yakov, because he got messed up over here. He didn't see who he's marrying, so we have to make sure to see who we are marrying. That's where the custom comes from. We shouldn't happen to us such a thing, God forbid. I don't think it's happening so fast, right? But then it happened. It happened to Yakov. So back to the question. How could he have gotten married to two sisters? So there's a number of answers given to this question. I'll share with you the answers, but none of them are good, except for the last one that I will share with you today. The first answer that the rabbis give is that they kept the mitzvot only when they were in Israel. But when they were not in Israel, they didn't keep the mitzvahs. It means the holiness of Israel was such a holy land, so over there they lived more holy. They kept all the mitzvot even before it was given. You understand what that means? In other words, they didn't have to keep the mitzvot. It wasn't even given yet. There was no commandments. It was by they were prophets, so they knew what the mitzvahs were going to be, so they took it upon themselves to be more strict to hold it. But that was only in Israel. Outside of Israel, they didn't do it. So therefore, Yaakov was not in Israel at the time. As I said before, he left home to a different country. So he was another country. He was in Iraq. Today would be Iraq. That's where this happened. So he wasn't in Israel, so he didn't have to keep the mitzvahs. Fine, that's one answer. But it's not such a good answer. You know why? Because, first of all, Rashi tells us that even when he was in Lavan's house, he kept all the mitzvahs. Rashi says clearly that when he was in Lavan's house, he kept all the mitzvahs. So the question is the same question. If that's the case, he was even in Iraq, he kept all the mitzvahs. Why didn't he keep this mitzvah not to marry two women, not to marry two wives? Another answer is given. The rabbis suggest that he was told by God to marry these 4 women because he had to bring to the world the 12 tribes. And they were going to be brought to the world only through these 4 women. So now, since God told him to do it, he had no choice. That was okay, right? But that's also not a good answer. Why? Because nowhere in the Chumash do we find that God told him such a thing. When you learn the text of the Torah, it sounds more like it just happened, he was fooled, and it wasn't coming from God. So why did he do it? Listen to our third answer. This is very interesting. This brings us to the subject of conversion. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yakov were the first Jews, right? Mm-hmm. So when they married these women, were they Jewish? They married non-Jews. No. They converted them. They converted them, right, to become Jewish. They wouldn't marry them if they weren't converted. So they converted them to become Jewish. Right? There's an interesting law that you may not have ever heard of, which I'll share with you tonight. You'll be shocked to hear this. It says that a convert is like a newborn child. When someone is, let's say, 30 years old and he converts to Judaism, it's as if he was born that day. Let me tell you what that means. It means that he shares no family connection to his mother, to his father, to his sisters, to his brothers. He's disconnected from them. He shares no familial connection with anyone. He's a newborn child, he's alone. Which means that if his mother dies, it means like this. If a mother and a child convert at the same time, they're halachically not considered mother and father. That means if the mother dies, the child doesn't have to sit shiva, doesn't have to say kaddish, nothing. It's not your mother. You're a newborn child. When they both convert, the mother is a newborn child and the child is a newborn child. Listen to this. It's even worse. I mean, worse, I'm not going to say worse, but it's even more astonishing. If a brother and a sister get converted. Imagine this, a brother and a sister get converted. They can get married.
What?
Halachically, by Torah law, they can get married because they're not brother and sister anymore.
Still to these days?
Oh, there's an interesting rabbis. Listen to this. The rabbis said that they shouldn't do it because then it's going to look like you got married, you became Jewish, so it became even less strict. So they said not to do it. But by Torah law, it would be no problem. They should no familial connection. Now, since these 4 sisters all converted, so the rabbis want to suggest that there was no problem marrying them because they were not connected by the halacha of sisters anymore. So there was no problem anymore. It's a good answer.
Yeah.
Atamivin, you understand? It's a very nice halachic catch. But that's not either such a good answer. Let me tell you why. Huh? You're shocked by this, huh? That you're not considered family anymore.
Because it's against common sense. I mean,
Why?
common sense to mother and daughter.
Think about it. But think about
Because
it.
you have blood, I mean, there is...
You have blood connection. Yes, there's a blood connection, but halachically, because you are a new person, a person that converts, is not just something additional happened to him, like he took on something additional. His whole existence is transformed. That's what the language of the rabbis is. Kekatan shenolad, if anyone knows Hebrew.
Yeah.
Like a baby that was just born. It's a new person. All your past is erased, forgotten, you have no connection. Now, that doesn't mean you should disrespect your mother that gave birth to you. Of course, by rabbinic law, you have to still treat your parents that brought you into the world, even though halachically, like we're saying, they're not in the same category, but you still have to honor them because they brought you into the world. So you have to be a mensch.
Also in these days, they won't see Kaddish for a mother, no?
No.
Even if the mom is converted?
So they will because they just, look, anyone can say Kaddish for anyone.
But they don't have to.
They don't have to. But they will. Most will because why not? My father says Kaddish for a lot of people. They hire him to say Kaddish for people. For example, someone dies, and their son, they don't have sons. What do?
Okay.
You hire someone to say Kaddish. You pay him, and he says Kaddish for 11 months. So if my father can say Kaddish for this person, then this convert can say Kaddish for that person. So they will. But they don't have to. It's a very interesting law.
So Sarah was not Jewish? Was converted?
They were Sarah was. They were all converted. Avram wasn't converted, meaning to say, Avram became Jewish when he was 70. Hashem made him Jewish when he was 70.
So
And the same thing with Sarah.
converted Sarah. To become
They converted
They came together. Hashem made them both Jewish at the same time. When he was 70 and she was 60. Hashem made a covenant with him to become the people of Israel, to start a new nation. Yitzchak was already born from Avram and Sarah. Yitzchak was already born from Avram and Sarah, so he was born Jewish. But Rivka was
not Jewish.
not Jewish. But she came to Yitzchak and he made her Jewish. Just like Avram and Sarah became Jewish, she became Jewish. Yakov was born from Rivka and Yitzchak. But he married Rachel and Leah. Who's Rachel and Leah?
Converts.
Non-Jews. He brought them in and converted them. So now they're no longer sisters, halachically. So he's allowed to marry them. So it didn't contradict the idea of that they kept all the Torah in the midst. The problem is it's not so simple. I'll tell you why. It's not either a good answer. Why? It's complicated. Why? Because this idea that when a non-Jew becomes Jewish, he's like a new person, is only started after the Torah was given. Not before the Torah was given. That idea of conversion, like we have it today, only started at Mount Sinai. Before Mount Sinai, converts didn't have the same status as today. So therefore they still were considered sisters. It didn't have that same halacha of converts. So again, the question returns, how was he able to marry two sisters? So let me get to the final and proper answer. Before the Torah was given, God gave to to Noach by the flood, he gave him 7 laws, known as the 7 Noahide laws. Those laws were given to all mankind. Everyone was obligated to do those laws. What were those 7 laws? You ever heard of those 7 laws? Mm-hmm. To believe in God, in one God, not to worship any idols, not to commit murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to be cruel to animals, and to set up a system in every society of law and order, and to follow those laws that are passed in every society, if they're just laws. Those are the 7 laws. Every man or woman was obligated to follow those 7 laws. Now, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yakov were also obligated to follow those 7 laws. Now, in addition to those 7 laws, what was the 7th law? That every society should set up a system of laws, right? So what happens if a society sets up a law that you're not allowed to pass a red light?
You have to follow.
You have to follow it. It becomes a Torah law. It becomes a law that you have to follow as part of that 7th mitzvah, that 7th commandment. You have to follow if they're just laws. Only if they're just. If they're moral. If they make a law that you have to start stealing, of course you can't. But if they make a law that's moral and just, you have to follow. In that time, it says, before the Torah was given, society as a whole took upon themselves many different things. As part of that, setting up a system of law. One of the things was that you don't marry sisters. I'm sorry, no, not that you don't marry sisters. No, I'm sorry. One of those laws was that you're not allowed to fool one another. You have to be honest. You have to be honest. You can't lie. If you made a promise to someone, you have to keep it. Not to be dishonest, and so on. That became one of the laws that society as a whole took upon themselves. Yeah? Okay. So now let me give you a scenario. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov took upon themselves to keep all the laws of the Torah, right? What happens if a law of the Torah is in contradiction to one of the 7 Noahide laws that society took upon themselves? What should they do? What should they do in that case? Should they follow the Torah law or the 7 laws? You follow my question? The question is simple. What happens if there's a conflict between your extra strict... Now, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov took upon themselves to fulfill all the mitzvot, right? Even before Sinai. But that was an extra stringency that they took upon themselves. They weren't commanded to do it. So what happens now if, let's say, a law that they took upon themselves as one of the mitzvot of the Torah is a contradiction to one of the laws that society took upon themselves, which they're obligated. This is not an extra stringency. That's an obligation. What do? They have to follow the law of the Noahide laws and not follow the Torah law. Why? Because this is an obligation and this is not. I'm talking about before Sinai. After Sinai, this became commandments for us. Okay. But before Sinai, it wasn't a commandment. It was an extra stringency. You can't take upon yourself an extra stringency and by that violate on the commandment that you're obligated. That doesn't work. For example, I'll give you an example. It says that Avraham kept all the mitzvahs except one. You know which one he didn't do? Circumcision. Avraham didn't circumcise himself till he was 99. He waited for God to tell him. Why did he wait? You're doing everything else. You're prophet, you know all the other mitzvahs. You're doing it all. You're eating matzah on Pesach. You're shaking a lulav on sukkahs and eating in a sukkah. All of a sudden, circumcision he doesn't do because it hurts. That's why he didn't do it. Why didn't he do it? I'll tell you why. Because circumcision involves cutting yourself and making yourself bleed and inflicting pain and harm on your body. That is a law you're not allowed to do. The 7 Noahide laws prohibits that. That's a prohibition as one of the 7 Noahide laws. And that everyone is obligated. So here he has a dilemma. I want to do the circumcision, but if I do it, I will then violate the 7 Noahide laws, because I'm not commanded. He wasn't commanded to do circumcision until he was 99. So let's say when he's 10 years old, he decides, I want to circumcise. Is he allowed to or not? He's not allowed to, because that would violate the Noahide laws, which says that you're not allowed to inflict harm on your body. You're not allowed to spill blood. So he was forced to wait till Hashem told him. Once Hashem told him, so he's allowed to, he's commanded. That's a different story. You understand? The same thing over here with the 2 sisters. What happened over here? Avram comes to the house of Lavan, and he tells him, I want to marry you. He fell in love with Rachel. Not Avram, I'm sorry, Yakov. Jacob, yeah. I'm sorry. Jacob comes to the house of Lavan, and he likes Rachel very much, and he makes a promise to her that he's going to marry her. In those days, when you made a promise, society took it upon themselves to keep promises, not to lie. You take upon yourself a promise, it's an obligation, you must do it. So he was now obligated to marry Rachel, whether he liked it or not. Now comes the story that on the night of the wedding, his father-in-law Lavan puts Rachel there instead of Leah. Puts Leah instead of Rachel. And by mistake he marries her. He doesn't see her, he doesn't recognize her, he married her. Now comes a week later, it's not my wife, it's Leah, it's not Rachel. But he's married to her already, so what should he do? But he promised Rachel that he's going to marry her. So now he has a dilemma. Am I going to marry Rachel and fulfill my promise, which is an obligation? Or, how could I marry 2 sisters? I took upon myself to do all the mitzvahs in the Torah before the Torah was given. I'm not allowed to marry 2 sisters. So which one should he do? If he marries her, he breaks a law of the Torah. If he doesn't marry her, he breaks a law of the Noahide laws. Which one is he obligated to do?
The Noah.
The Noahide laws.
time.
So he had no choice but to break the mitzvah of the Torah and marry 2 sisters. Because if he wouldn't, he'd be violating the Noahide law.
But the law will
Which that he's obligated. The Torah laws is just a stringency. Now, once the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, the whole thing changed. Now we're obligated to fulfill all the mitzvahs of the Torah. So let's say today, if this same story happens, and a man gets married to a woman that he loves this woman, and is dark, and his father-in-law is a liar, and he gives him the younger daughter before the one he loves. And he ends up the next morning, oops, not my wife, what do I do now? Is he allowed to marry the other wife?
No.
The other sister?
No.
For sure not, because once God spoke to us at Sinai, he made that prohibited. So we can't violate that law. But if God didn't tell us, we just took it upon ourselves not to marry 2 sisters. But you already made a promise to Rachel that you're going to marry her. To break a promise is a violation of the Noahide laws. You have no choice, you have to marry her.
But,
So in this case, he had no choice, he had to marry
What
the
about
but
the
even
fair
though
and
he was
false
strict to the marriage,
What?
even though he was strict to the marriage, so actually he was strict. I mean,
He was tricked, but he's married. So he would have to divorce Leah. He would have to divorce her first. He wasn't going to divorce her.
What about the
Didn't have
third
to
and fourth
divorce.
sister?
What?
the
He
third and
marries
fourth.
2 other sisters.
Right.
So,
Exactly why he did it again.
yeah, the third and the fourth. The third is not a sister of the other one, but the fourth, yes.
Why he did it again.
That's a good question.
Oops, I did it.
You understand this question?
Again.
Why the other 2 sisters?
Yeah.
Could be, and I have to look this up, I'm going to guess. It could be that wasn't considered a regular marriage. That with the maidservants, I would look that up and I'll get back. I'll answer that. That's a good question.
Era una fair.
Definitely not regular marriage.
Huh?
It shouldn't come in the same way, so we respect the tribe. So
Could also be, I have to look. Let me not guess. I'll look it up. What's the lesson of this whole story? You know what the lesson is? It's a very powerful lesson. A lot of times we take it upon ourselves to be strict, to take on our own stringencies. We want to be more religious, more committed. The lesson is that it's always, that's very good. If you want to be more religious and more strict and take on upon yourself stringencies, by all means, it's a very good thing. But you have to make sure that you don't do it on account of someone else. What happened over here? Yakov was more religious, but if he would be more religious, Rachel would suffer, right? She wouldn't marry him. That's not right. Don't take upon yourself stringencies if it's going to hurt another person. That's wrong. You want to be frum? You want to be very religious? On your own terms. Spend your own money on religion, not someone else's. Spend your own emotions, not someone else's. That's not right. Now, of course, it doesn't mean you should break the laws, because someone else tells you to break the laws. But stringencies, you have to be careful. You want to be more religious than the law. You know, a lot of people, they even take upon themselves greater stringencies. You know about that. The lesson over here is that you can only do that if you're not hurting anybody else. The moment you're hurting someone else by becoming more religious yourself, extra religious. In other words, by going beyond the letter of the law. There's the law, and beyond the letter of the law. Right? For example, someone's going to say, I want to learn a lot of hours every evening. I want to learn a lot. I want to be more religious. Go to another class, and another shiur, and another... And the wife is saying, wait a minute, I need your help in the house. I'm sorry, I'm religious tonight. You can't do that. You know, that's very nice. You want to be religious, and you want to be extra religious, do it on your own time, when you don't have to be, you don't have to hurt other people in the process. That's what would happen over here if Yakov would have done. Yakov had that choice. I could be religious. I keep all the mitzvahs even before it was given. But then there's a Rachel that would have suffered. She would be cheated out of a promise. Yeah, you're hurting someone else, don't be religious. Don't be extra religious. So with the law, you're not allowed to violate. If your spouse tells you, for example, don't put on film because I don't want you to put on film. I need you in the house. Can't you? I'm sorry, I need those 5 minutes also. That's unreasonable. That's a law. But an extra religious, an extra stringency, that you do on your own time. Not on her time. Not on his time. And there's a lot of people that make that mistake. They become overzealous and very religious and very excited about God, which is a good thing, but they lose sight of how to balance between your life and your family and your wife and your husband and your kids and your neighbors and your surroundings and God. They don't know how to choose. That's not a question of choice. They don't know how to balance themselves. You see this all the time, and you know what happens at the end? Families break up. Husbands and wives end up divorcing. I've seen it with my own eyes. I can give you names. God forbid, it should never happen to anyone. Of people that lost their family because they didn't know how to manage this concept. Balance extra religious fervor, zest and excitement with being able to balance it with the family. And that ruined families, and you have to know. What's your question?
My question is, first you follow the halacha to 100%, right?
Yeah.
And then you go back and help out with whatever social things, and then you go back and go ahead, be extra zealous, right?
Yeah, so I'm saying, if it's a law, for example, Shabbos, you have to keep Shabbos. We know that there's a law to keep Shabbos. What happens if someone tells me, sorry, you can't keep Shabbos, we have to go now as a family to the beach and go swimming and have a nice time. So you have to, so in every such case, I'm not even going to tell you tonight that you should say, no way, I'm going to keep Shabbos and don't manage it well. Even when it comes to laws, if you're born into it, and that's the way you were brought up, and you're not overwhelming anyone else by becoming stronger, step by step, I say always with people, take step by step. Bring your family with if you want to become more committed. Bring your family with if you could. Don't jump and hurt. But certainly when it comes to stringencies, you cannot do this and hurt other people in the process. That's just not right. It's against the way the Torah wants it. So when it comes to halacha and the mitzvahs that we have no choice, So you have to, even then you have to go to a rabbi and figure it out and get advice. Some people, they take on everything at one time, even if it's halacha, and then it breaks up. They can't deal with it. Easy come, easy go. What comes quick goes quick, They say that. You have to do this with seichel, with understanding. So I don't want to answer your question clearly to say that you can violate a law and be careful. But I would say to you, in every step a person takes, think it through, make it work for the family as much as you can, for your station in life, where you are, and make it so that everyone around you is comfortable with what you're doing. And go one step above if you have to, Pull people good, but don't overwhelm anyone. Can't overwhelm people.
So for
It'll fall apart.
instance, when you hear those situations that people become very religious and doesn't do anything else and the wife has to work, that would not be right. I mean,
First of all, where does it say that going to work is not religious? I go to work every day. My father went to work every day. He's very religious, and I'm very religious. We work.
No,
Where
I'm
does it
saying
say that
that's
you shouldn't
okay,
work?
but I hear those situations that religious people become very religious and they only go
They
to
don't go
the
to
temple and all that. They
They
don't
make the
work.
wife work.
Yes,
Not a good idea.
yes, of course, but
Not for that.
okay, all right. No, I hear that
I'm
many
serious.
times. No, I hear that so many times.
Anyway, I'm going to finish this part. Thank you very much, and we'll hope to see you next week again for the next webcast, and good night.